learned a lot, and I saw at the end you talked about footwear, so I'm going to pick up where you left off. And there are some things that I'm going to talk about that's going to be a repeat of what you just saw. We're working with the same kinds of problems and the same kinds of forces. I'm very honored, really, to be here today to talk to you about footwear issues, because I know they're challenging for people with Charcot-Marie Tooth disease. And the bottom line is everybody has to wear shoes. But I want to thank Dr. Day and Jennifer Fisher for inviting me to come down. I've been making footwear for people with Charcot-Marie Tooth disease for just about 40 years now. I've even seen some people in the audience from the 80s, going all the way back, that were clients of mine and have become friends of mine over the years. And it's really nice to see them. And anyway, I saw recently, over the last few years, people were coming to me who had been to Dr. Day's clinic, and so I decided it was time to pay them a visit, and I went down and visited Dr. Day, and Jennifer Fisher was there, and we made a connection, and I hope it turns out to be a good one for all of us. Anyway, I would like to start. I know there's a question and answer period, but I'd like to start by asking you some questions. They may be obvious questions. So, how many people have issues with footwear? Not necessarily how they look, but how they function. Yeah, many of you do. I'm sure. Well, that's why you're here. How many people really hate ugly-looking orthopedic shoes? I knew that would raise everyone's hand, just in case the other question didn't. So the real question is really, how many people feel that they have some limitation in their lives, some inability of coordination when they're involved in activities that involve walking? Not surprising, not surprising. Well, what we're all here for today is to find ways that we can get around better in spite of those problems that are the hallmark of Charcot-Marie Tooth disease: the muscle weakness, the instability, and the foot deformities. But I'd like to start with a little story. I'm going to move this over a little bit because I have some notes that I'm going to refer to. So a mother and father brought their young teenage son to me for consultation not that long ago. He was a nice-looking boy, 16 years old, with Charcot-Marie Tooth disease, broad shoulders, square jaw. And I looked down and he was wearing flip-flops. So I said, "Why are you wearing flip-flops?" He said, "Because I can't find any shoes to fit over my toes. And besides, you know, I went to a facility once and they tried to get me to wear these old man diabetic shoes, and I'm just not going to have it. And if you think that you're going to give me those kind of shoes, you're mistaken." I assured him that wouldn't be the case. So I asked him to walk. Let's see, I've got to see if I can get this. Looks like the film's not going to play. It should go right to a film. But anyway, what I saw was a very typical gait for someone with Charcot-Marie Tooth disease. Lifted each foot at the hip flexors so that the toes could clear the ground. Reached to the walls for stability. The ball of the foot touched first. And if you watch this, it would show him walking back and forth. Then I looked at his feet. technical difficulties. Why isn't the slide advancing? Oh, look. Sorry. Will it continue?
I think so.
All right, well, I'll try.
Just click on that.
Oh, okay, good. So I examined his feet. I looked at his feet, and he had these huge calluses, of course, along the lateral side of his foot, along that base of that fifth metatarsal, the styloid process that David referred to, and some large calluses on his hammer toes. Click on this. Also, he had this large lesion on the outside of his foot. I said, well, why are you walking in flip-flops? He said, because they feel more stable to me. I can feel the ground. I have a sense of proprioception where my foot is. And those bones on the side of his feet obviously gave him some level of stability. I said, well, okay, well, say that bone sticking out on the side of your foot, say that was a kickstand that's supporting your foot. What if I was able to take that kickstand and lift it up and shift the weight over to the other side of your foot? Wouldn't that give you more stability? And he agreed that that would. Yeah, that would. And so I said, well, you know, when you're walking too, this would be another slide with the film. Let's see if I could play it this time. Didn't work. Anyway, I said, when you're walking, you usually hit the ball of your foot first and then your heel. And I said, that's great if you want to walk backward. But if you want to walk forward, you're going to want to make some heel contact. So I said, what if the ground came up to your heel so that you can make heel contact? Wouldn't that propel you forward more easily? And he agreed that it would. And as a matter of fact, with the constriction in being able to lift up the front of the foot because of the tight Achilles, the only way he could get his heel down to the ground was to invert his foot, was to roll it to the outside so that he could take the tension off the Achilles tendon and get his foot down to the ground. So by rolling his foot over to the inside, to the medial side of his foot, I had to lift the heel at the same time, which would help his gait. So I also wanted to go back for a second here. Well, you saw the lesion on the side of his foot. He says he's had a recurring ulceration on that site, but it's healed now, it's cured, and it doesn't hurt him. I said, well, if you had a sore like that on your knuckle, would you knock on someone's door with it? He said, no, of course I wouldn't. I said, well, you're putting about 100 times more pressure on a spot that's about the same size as your knuckle, and how would you expect it to heal? I says, it's obvious that we're going to need to get you into some better footwear. Oh, and one other thing, I said, what do you do about crowds wearing flip-flops? He said he avoids crowds. I said, you mean you don't go to rock concerts? You don't go to Warriors games? You don't go to Giants games? He had a dog. I said, can't even take your dog for a walk? He said, yeah, I can't walk my dog in the woods. Can't do that in flip-flops. So I said, well, it's time really to get some proper shoes. But this was a consultation appointment. So we looked at all the alternatives that might be available, as we typically do with a consultation. So number one, we have to look at his lifestyle. He's a teenager. He has some needs emotionally and for his own emotional development of how those shoes should look. We had to also look, of course, at his problem and what would be accommodative for him and functional. And we had to look at costs. Many of these things aren't covered by insurance, but we had to look and see what kinds of things were covered by insurance. So we ultimately decided that the best option would be to build him brace boots. We talked about braces. We talked about orthotic devices. The orthotic devices took up too much room in the shoes. The braces also took up room in the shoes, at least in the shoes that he wanted to wear. So in order to address his particular needs, we had to build something that integrated the orthotic devices, the braces, and would accommodate his foot shape. And they also had to look pretty cool. So I'm just going to show you a little how this was constructed. This is a digital image of the last that we use. The last is the form you build a shoe around. This is a digital image of the last that we use to make his shoes, and this is his foot corrected. So, as David indicated initially, the first thing to do is to lift up the forefoot and stabilize it and create room underneath the first ray, the first metatarsal head, which was very prominent, to add some stability. Is that working? Yes. We had to accommodate that bone on the side of his foot. Even though we're pushing up on that area, we still needed to have an accommodation or a little pocket for that to fall into. We didn't want to put all the stress and pressure to correct him on that. And the orthotic that's built inside the boot, as you can see, has a wide lateral flange. Now, obviously, you couldn't fit this kind of device into a ready-made shoe. But the way custom shoes are made is once you've built the last and you've corrected the position, you've aligned it for correct position, then you build an orthotic device without any compromise, without any concern about it having to fit inside of a shoe. And then you build the shoe around the last and the orthotic device together. So as you can see, this was an option for him that really could incorporate everything he needed without compromise. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm a certified pedorthist. How many people know what a certified pedorthist is? How many more people? Not very many people have heard of us. Well, a pedorthist is kind of like a shoe pharmacist. We fill prescriptions for the medical community utilizing footwear and devices. And sometimes they're custom, sometimes they're ready-made, sometimes they're modified. And what we do when what we're trying to do is to capture the foot in the position it needs to be in by modifying the ground plane, modifying the ground that they walk on so that we can hold the foot in the right position as weight passes through the foot and hopefully help the person walk in a relatively straight line. Now, these are some of the modalities that we deal with. Let's see, are they coming up? Why isn't this okay? This isn't working exactly the way it did on my computer, but that's okay. I forgot to mention, there's two kinds of pedorthists, really. There's the kind that would be called a clinical pedorthist, which is what I am. I'm in private practice. Clinical pedorthists may also work at hospitals or orthopedic facilities. And then there's retail pedorthists. A retail pedorthist is usually connected with a shoe store, a comfort shoe store. And their practice is more of a sideline. They may not deal with the same kinds of complex problems, but they do have a plethora of shoes available to them and an inventory where they can fit people, and they generally don't need an appointment where you do with a clinical pedorthist. But these are the modalities we work in, all of these. And I'm going to start with commercial comfort footwear, which most retail pedorthists would really deal with. But I think it's important to hit on that because we need to know what to do before you go see a pedorthist. And then we deal with in-depth therapeutic footwear. These are shoes that have extra depth and can fit orthotic devices inside, and they have special designs. We modify shoes to improve the fit and the function of them. We make inserts in orthotic devices, which orthotists and podiatrists also do. And we make custom footwear. Not all pedorthists make custom footwear. There's probably just a handful of us that are actually shoemakers. But pedorthists are at least trained in how to take molds and order shoes. And we deal with ankle-foot orthoses, the same as an orthotist does, but only the ankle and foot components. And I'm not going to cover too much in that area because I think that was already pretty well covered by David. So let's talk about commercial footwear first, because you don't want to see another specialist if you don't have to. I think you have to exhaust all efforts in finding commercial footwear that'll work for you. You may be wearing AFOs or braces, and you need to find footwear that will accommodate that. Or you need to, if you're not at that level yet, you're going to want to find commercial footwear that will give you some of those properties, those orthopedic properties. So I'm going to focus on some of those properties to look for. All right, first of all, a good example would be, firstly, we want to have lateral stability. We're looking for lateral stability. You're going to want to find shoes that have lateral stability. If I look at this, let's take, for instance, basketball shoes. Because basketball is a sport that has lateral motion, side-to-side motion, basketball shoes are generally very stable on the lateral side. As you can see, this has a natural flaring. It's also a high top. Here it is from the back. And you can see how there's extra strong material on the lateral side to create more stability there as well. Boots. Boots often create more stability as well. Without a brace inside, they do at least give you some sensation on your leg with the leather, so you can actually make corrections in gait, because you can feel when your foot is moving when you have a boot along on the lower part of your leg. Boots with a little higher heel work pretty well. These obviously wouldn't work well for people with hammer toes, but they're generally stable and they have a wide base. And if you're wearing foot orthotic devices that have an extra heel elevation inside, there's usually room for that as well. These are other examples as well. And remember, I'm looking at footwear here that's not necessarily orthopedic, but commercial footwear. The boot on the right has a stiff upper, and it can help with some weakness in dorsiflexion with a mild drop foot. And as you see, the boot on the right has a higher heel, and to accommodate that tight Achilles. So what about nice-looking shoes, like Mary Jane's, feminine shoes, shoes that actually have gender attached to them? Here's a couple of nice Mary Janes. They look pretty nice, really nice. They're not dress shoes, they're not evening shoes, but at least they're feminine. You see, but they're very different. See, the one on the right has a very narrow base. It's going to be very unstable. The one on the left has a wider base. So that's what you should look for when you're going to get these kind of shoes. Find ones that have a wide base. Here's one that looks relatively stable, but if you inspect it a little more closely, you can see that it's not really stable at all. It's kind of rounded on the bottom. I actually ground off that soft area underneath on that shoe, and it made it much more stable. And of course, you're also going to be looking for shoes with room for claw toes. Of course, this says hammer toes, but David was correct. It's really claw toes. So what kind of footwear will work for that? Shoes with spandex or elasticize uppers in the front. Here's a shoe made by Finn that has a very, very soft leather on the side and a little firmer leather over the top. Shoes with mesh uppers. A lot of athletic shoes have mesh uppers too, and they're more accommodating for the toes. This is another Finn Comfort, and one of the good things about Finn Comforts is they're very stable, but they also come with a really thick insole. So it can be pulled out and a better orthotic can be put in it. It is like an extra depth shoe. And as you can see, it comes with these very thick inner soles. You can also address the need for a higher heel by cutting off the front of the insole and just leaving the back part in. It adds a little heel elevation. Of course, Birkenstocks. I've seen a lot of people wearing Birkenstocks who can barely walk, actually. But they feel stable in them the same way that the young man did at the beginning, because you feel closer to the ground and you feel more stability. But mainly it's to accommodate hammer toes. Now, if you have peripheral neuropathy, if you don't have feeling in your foot, then I think it's really not, you don't want to go to a shoe store looking for shoes. I think that's the time to find a specialist, someone who knows what they're doing when it comes to footwear. We see a lot of people with diabetes too, and of course they have neuropathy and have no feeling in their feet as well, and so we deal with that a lot, and that's one of the only circumstances where insurance companies actually are addressing that need. There's a lot of shoes with rocker bottoms on the market today. Rocker bottoms do help with forward motion by rocking you forward. This one's made by Hoka. It's a pretty good shoe. It has a pretty stable base. You can see it's wide across the base. I would avoid any shoes like MBTs or Skechers that have that really squishy heel. They're very unstable. There have been times when people have brought them to us and we've ground out the soft part and put in firm material to replace it, because there's other properties of the shoe that are good. So let's talk about depth footwear. These are some of the brands that we deal with. David also mentioned these two. Drew, PW Minor used to be the only two for many years. PW Minor goes back into the 1800s. Apex, Orthofeet, Dr. Comfort, Propay, Apis. These are brands that you can get from a pedorthist, and you can even order some of these online, believe it or not. They'll sell shoes to anyone if they can. So one of the advantages to these depth shoes is that many of them come in different last shapes to fit different shaped feet. So that's an advantage. They also come in a multitude of sizes, from very small to very large, and of course multiple widths. That's an important factor. And there's some thoughtful designs. This is an athletic shoe made by Apex that has an opening in the back. Usually if you have to wear a brace like this, an Arizona brace or any brace, you might have to get two different sizes because you need more room around the back of the shoe. Here's a shoe that's designed with an open back and a Velcro strap, and you can generally get both feet in these shoes, one with a brace and one without. There's another shoe that's made by Dr. Comfort. That whole shoe opens up all the way down to the toe. So if you have a hard time getting into a shoe, if you're wearing bandages, if you need extra room in the front to accommodate your orthotics or your braces, it opens all the way. And of course, Velcro straps are always handy when your hands are involved. And the shoe also has a spandex in the front. A lot of times people don't have insurance to cover custom shoes, and they can't afford their costs. They can be quite expensive. So we're forced to try and get them comfortable within the amount of money they can afford. So to do that, we alter shoes. We have a multitude of alterations that we can do to shoes to make them fit and function better. We can add more lateral flaring. This man's actually wearing a kind of an Arizona brace. He's actually post-polio, but you can see the lack of stability that this shoe has and how much his foot hangs over the outside. This is the way we addressed that on an earlier pair of shoes, where we actually built with crepe a buttress along the outside of the shoe and filled in that space underneath, and did our best to try and make it look like it was part of the shoe. But more often we do this. We actually cut and split the side of the shoe, spread it open to make it wide, to flare it, and fill that space. And the shoe doesn't even look like it's altered because it has the same side as the original design. We'll also take usually a firmer material and build it up along the lateral side to create more stability as well, and use a softer material on the inside, so we're trying to force the foot to roll over to the medial side if we can. This is another example of a shoe that we've cut and split to make a lateral flare. I saw somebody wearing a pair of those Atrex shoes today. They were turning over. Someone was walking around with them, and the foot looked like, maybe you've been wearing a brace, but the foot looked like it was hanging over the side of the shoe. That's an alteration would give that shoe more stability. We can also widen shoes. Instead of just cutting along the bottom, we cut all the way up inside the shoe. We spread it open, we put in a little shim, we fill it with hot melt glue, and we can actually make the shoe wider and give more stability that way. And rocker bottoms, now that they're available on commercial shoes, that's great, but we've been doing rocker bottoms for 40 years. And rocker bottoms actually is a therapy of its own, and they're not all the same. There's various rocker bottoms for different types of problems. As you can see, there's ones that address ankle problems, midfoot problems, metatarsal problems, etc. But the type of rocker bottom that we usually use in situations with CMT is one what we call the Lisfranc rocker, because the fulcrum, I don't have a pointer here, but the fulcrum is that red line. You can see that's the area where the shoe teeter-totters forward. So once a person can get their weight to pass that fulcrum, then it facilitates forward motion. We can also do a number of upper alterations to shoes too. This woman was wearing an AFO, but she wanted to wear braces, boots, so that she could cover them up. She didn't want people to see them. First we added zippers, and then we added an extra panel to accommodate the extra circumference around her leg. Now, as I said, there's a lot of people that make inserts and orthotic devices, but basically what you want to keep in mind is there's two different kinds, two basic designs. One is called a functional device, and it addresses forces that run through the foot and can manipulate motion in the joints. We usually cast the foot with all the bones lined up. Then the device becomes an interface between the foot with all the bones lined up and the floor of the shoe. And that's usually called a functional device. And then there's accommodative devices. Accommodative devices attenuate shock, and they diffuse all the areas of high pressure on the bottom of the foot. For people with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, there's a need for both of those components to be built into a single device, both functional and accommodative, because there are bony prominences on the bottom of the foot that get calluses, and there's a need for functional control. This shows the different kinds. The one in the middle is kind of soft and squishy. When a foot's rigid, we go with a softer device. When we want to impose a force on the foot, we go with a harder device. It can be full length if the shoe has a removable insole to replace it with, or it could be 3/4 length, which we sometimes do when there isn't enough room inside the shoe. This is an example. We'll go back to this last again, and you can see how the device inside becomes an interface. It fills in all the spaces, and then it's flat on the bottom and fits the floor of the inside of the shoe. And you can see here that those green spots are the lowest spots on the device. Everything else around it is raised up and supporting the foot. Well, custom-made footwear has been my specialty for quite a long time. And I think once you've exhausted all the other methods, braces, ready-made shoes, orthotic devices, shoes and modifications, then you're in the category of needing custom shoes. Unfortunately, in the United States, your choices are somewhat limited. They're limited by the fact that medical insurance rates will only pay for footwear if you have diabetes. And what they pay is very low. And quality shoes cannot be made with what they pay for that. But it has generated an industry that can make shoes that are rather ugly, unfortunately, like this. This is what you get when you want a pair of molded shoes. Usually a pedorthist or an orthotist would take molds of the feet and send them out to a laboratory where they make hundreds and hundreds of shoes. And this is what you generally get back. But there's a loophole, really. There's a loophole for people with Charcot-Marie tooth disease, and that is because of your neurological deficit, you would qualify for braces. And Arizona braces became effective several years ago for people that were using it, but this was a guy who came up with these, noticed that there was a very generous insurance reimbursement rate on a brace that no one ever used anymore. And he built a business called the Arizona Brace Company. He was a friend of mine. He was originally a shoemaker, a Native American, in fact. And started promoting these Arizona braces to podiatrists and orthotists around the country, and now they're widely used. Well, I found that I can use these same codes to bill for brace boots, and those are shoes like the first pair I was talking about with the braces built inside. I don't even call them shoes. Medical insurance doesn't pay for shoes. If you say orthopedic shoes, there's no reimbursement rate. They'll only pay for people who have diabetes. And this is a loophole that you could take advantage of. And so that gives us some freedom in being able to bill for these kinds of things, because they can be rather expensive. I'll show you some examples of brace boots. This is just showing you the method. First, we take footprints and measurements that show the various positions, parts of the foot where there's pressure. We take measurements and we take a mold of the foot. We now do all this digitally, but this is a picture of my shoemaker who worked for me when we made the lasts in-house by hand. The uppers are designed by craftsmen and made on the last. And this is a hiking boot, and you can see kind of the outline of the brace built inside of this. This is another pair that we made for a very proper British gentleman who was getting his shoes before his accident. He actually had an accident from Lobs of London. There should be another shot of that shoe from the